Hi everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the New Blood Digital Festival 2022. My name's Marie and I'm Foundation Manager at D&AD. So this year's festival gives our audience access to a range of opportunities, including 3 expert talks, today of which is the second, portfolio opportunities made possible by advanced website creation platform EditorX, including our exciting new portfolio competition, whose winners are now live on the festival page, so do check them out, and in-person and online portfolio surgeries with over 500 spaces, an exclusive online networking opportunity that we had yesterday with Anyone, the phone book of the future, plus an exhibition of over 30 university courses you can explore right here on the festival page. A big welcome to today's talk, which is Go Inside the Creative Process with the Black Panther Winner, which is going to be spoken to you by our speaker today, Sam Shepherd, who is EVP Executive Creative Director at Leo Burnett Chicago. So Sam will be talking to you about creative processes, how their creative processes evolved over the years in order to land in the coveted D&AD Black Pencil. You will see that there is a chat box at the side of this talk, so please do use this to let us know your thoughts, any questions you have as we're going through the presentation, which will make sure we will leave time for those questions at the very end of this talk. So do make sure you're putting them in as they come to you. And that's it from me for now. Without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Sam.
Hello, how's it going? Hey, thanks for having me. I promise this will be fun. And I know I'm supposed to go through kind of the evolution of my creative process, which I'm going to spend the first kind of chunk of this doing. Hi again. But then I think most importantly, I'm going to take you through a recent idea that I just did at Leo Burnett that I also feel like is a good representation of my creative process brought to life. So it's kind of I think it's a good case study just to kind of take you through some of my mantra. So if you don't mind, I'll get into it. I'm a little jealous that in the UK it's beer o'clock. It's a little early here in Chicago, but I think it's going to be fun. So really quickly, like I said, I first will just kind of take you through my process, right? And I promise this will be really quick because talking about yourself sometimes can get really boring, right? And so really quickly, I'll take you through just how I develop my creative process. And I think the best word for that is luck. And what I mean by luck is that I got lucky really early on. I got to work for some of the most unbelievable teachers on the planet, right? And the main lesson here is really just following people in the industry, right? That's a decision that I made early on. Is I wasn't going to follow the name of an agency. I wasn't going to follow a brand. I was going to follow people that I really admired. And so in that sense, I got lucky that I got to learn from the best in the industry, right? So some of these people here, Matt Eastwood, Menno Clune, Britt Nolan, Liz Taylor, it was so important because I feel like you don't develop your creative process on your own, right? If you learn from great teachers, you're pulling from them. And so I really did learn from these people, and I was so fortunate to get to work under them. But it wasn't just great teachers. I had a great partner for a lot of years, a guy named Frank Cartagena, and he was my copywriter. And again, I just feel incredibly lucky. I was at the right place at the right time, that I was working with a lot of people that had a very similar mantra, very similar point of view. So if you want to call that kind of their creative process, it was very similar. And so the best way I can kind of sum that up is, I think Lee Clow, chairman of TBWA, Media Arts Lab, he said it best, right? And I love his quote from Lee. He says, most ideas are a bit scary, and if an idea isn't scary, it's not an idea at all. And this quote really just sums up like a similar mantra from all the different mentors that I had, right? And for me, it's how you approach one thing is really how you approach everything. So no matter how big or small a project was, they were coming at it with the same ambition and really looking for the same thing in every idea. Okay, how does it scare us? How does it scare us in a different way? And how do we find that little nugget in there that we're like, ooh, I don't know if we could do that, or okay, this is scary in a different way. And I think it's important to realize, I think just kind of my mantra, fear is your friend. A lot of people run away from scary things that might seem too hard, or, oh, I don't know how we're going to pull that off. But I think that's the one thing I'm looking for is like, okay, how has this not been done before? Right? So fear is your friend. And when I talk about fear, I'm not, there's a lot of different types of fear, and this is definitely not what I'm talking about, right? This is the bad kind of scary. It might be different for you. And there's also other bad kind of scaries, right? So my very first job, I purposely made this really small, but my very first job, I designed this banner ad for 1 year straight. Okay, that's all I did. This is State Farm. And that's all I did for a year straight, to the point where I could tell you that hex value of that State Farm red in my sleep. I knew every single detail of this banner ad. And to the point where my bosses had me snapping every single element to the grid in Photoshop. So I don't know if the grid is showing up well, but that CTA button is not snapped to a grid. And if it wasn't snapped perfectly, they would then schedule a post-mortem meeting. I don't know if you can see that there on Saturday, they would schedule a whole meeting to go over why my pixels weren't snapped perfectly. And that scared the shit out of me. And why am I telling you all this? This is a bad example of scary. This is not the scary I'm talking about. That's actually scary. I'm talking about finding ideas that scare you in a good way. So hopefully you don't have this kind of banner experience. But if anything, it taught me, okay, that's a bad scary. How do you find ideas that kind of frighten you in a good way? So that's a little background, just of my creative process. And so I think the best way to just explain to you how that comes to life is with a recent idea that we did at Leo Burnett. And so if you haven't seen it yet, I'm gonna play a quick case study, a 2-minute case study, and then I'm gonna really dive into kind of the nitty gritty details. And there's going to be a lot of questions, but before I do that, when I talk about finding an idea that scares you, this was I took a picture of my notebook. This was the original notes that I wrote when a team showed me this idea, right? And so I'll never forget this moment, because just on a page, just scribbled notes, this idea really scared me. I go, oh God, like this is crazy, right? So you'll see how it came to life in the end, and then I'll rewind again and take you through how we pulled it off. Great. So hopefully you could hear that okay. So there's probably a lot of questions even after, like, that's the case study, right? So that's supposed to be the end all culmination summing everything up that we did. And even then I still feel like there's probably a lot of questions of what the hell did we do? How did we do it? And that's purposely because there were so many things we couldn't say legally in that video. And that's why I'm excited that, if you don't mind, in this presentation, I can take you behind the scenes through some of the things that legally we couldn't talk about. But really quick, let me rewind, because I understand that if you're not an American, the gun issue in the United States probably seems insane, right? And I'll first just say it's embarrassing, right? It's an embarrassing American only problem. And so I'm going to do a really quick rewind into the NRA, just to kind of level set before I then take us through why we did what we did. And so, starting things off, you just see this image, and this is one of the first images that the team showed me of, like, hey, what if we just showed the effects of gun violence in a whole new way in terms of loss of potential, right? Graduations are usually so happy, it's a way forward. What if we just show how many students didn't get to graduate? Okay, and so that was the first time, just from an image, we're like, ooh, that's really powerful, right? And so we use CDC, the Center of Disease Control. We used their data going back, 40 years, and went year by year and figured out how many students died from gun violence. And we got to the number 3,044. And so you're probably thinking, 3,044 students died from gun violence. Why aren't things changing, right? Like a number so astronomically horrifying. How come nothing's been done? And unless you're an American, it's crazy. But I do think it takes understanding American culture a little bit, which I'm going to do a quick history lesson. I promise this won't be too boring. But why does America have such a gun problem? And specifically, why aren't laws changing, right? And for our client, Change the Ref, we decided and we determined that it's because of the NRA, and this is the National Rifle Association. They've been around for a couple hundred years, and they are really powerful in the U.S., right? They're kind of the boogeyman, and they're really effective. And they're effective in a couple ways. The first one is that they control the narrative around guns, right? Instead of being logical about, okay, like maybe certain guns shouldn't exist, or maybe it should be hard to get a gun, they create the most polarizing rhetoric. It is either, the government's coming to get your guns. And so, like, when you create something that divisive, you have to pick a side, right? So they're really effective on controlling the narrative around guns. And I think most importantly, the amount of money that they donate to politicians and corporations to make sure no gun safety laws are passed, right? And we call this the slippery slope. They believe that if any gun safety law gets passed, what's next? They're going to come and take your guns, right? So the amount of money involved is what makes them really scary, right? A lot of people won't mess with them. They don't know how deep their pockets go. They know that they have politicians on their side because they're directly funding, their campaigns. And so that's the NRA. That's the reason that gun safety in America isn't getting better. So we decided, okay, like, that seems like a pretty specific enemy to go after, to just start chip away. And we understand that, like, we're not gonna change gun culture in America overnight. But that's where Manuel and Patricia Oliver come in. They were our partners on this, and they started the charity Change the Ref when their son Joaquin was killed in 2018 in the Parkland school shooting. And they're incredible people, and they had one goal, right? That one goal is, they just asked us in a meeting. They said, how far would you go to confront the NRA? That's where we'll rewind really quick, because when I showed them that image of the chairs, right, that powerful image, they said, wow, that's powerful. but so what? And that really killed me. That floored me because I'm like, oh man, we have such a great idea. But they said the idea can only be so great unless it's placed in front of the people that need to see it. And that was a really important moment because in their opinion, all the work that's been done in the anti-gun violence space, they feel like it's just been preaching to the choir, right? Incredible commercials have been made, really heartfelt commercials that get a reaction, but who's watching those? And what do they leave you feeling? Do they leave you feeling that, oh, gun violence is bad? I think we all know that. So their response of "so what" to me was crazy. So that was kind of the second part of the idea. The chair image is only good if you can place it in front of those who are responsible. So that was their push for us. Like they said, hey, how could we actually get these NRA guys to come and speak in front of these chairs and finally confront them with the cause of all their lobbying and their corruption, right? So there's a big difference from that idea sitting on the page and then figuring out step by step a way to bring it to life. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through how we did it, right? And the very first step, we had to find someone equally as crazy as we were, and that just happened to be a director named Brian Buckley. And he's a famous director. I think he was once named like the king of the Super Bowl. He's an incredible guy, but Brian's insane. And he also shares a passion for changing the gun culture in America. So once we shared this with Brian, just seeing like how passionate he was and how he was willing to go to the ends of the earth with us. Brian doesn't look like this. I found a funny picture of him, but he was all in. So that was the first step, getting a great production partner on board. But then after talking with Brian, the next step was, okay, how do you get one of these pro NRA guys to come and speak at a school? They're already very suspicious about being tricked and things like that. And so we decided you have to create a school or a university that they would want to come talk to. So overnight, we had to create a fictitious university, and we called it James Madison Academy. And the reason that we did that is because James Madison was one of the original founders of the Second Amendment. He was one of the original pro-gun politicians in America. So just that name alone, we knew it was the type of name that a pro-gun speaker might want to come and talk to. But we didn't stop there, right? We knew that we had to create this school overnight, and so we created every single detail. We worked with our design team, and you notice even in their crest, it says acta non verba. We hid little Easter eggs in there, right? So that means actions, not words. So, but the trick is that you had to create a school overnight, and you had to make it look like it's been there for 20 years. So we had to create an entire website, every single part of this website. And we even had to work with Google, right? If these pro NRA, if these NRA members were to happen to search James Madison Academy, we had to serve them ads in their area to make it look like it was a real school. But we created every single aspect of the school, the identity, the letterheads, email servers, everything, so that it looked like a legit university. The next step was we needed a DBA, and I had no clue what a DBA was, but really it's an acronym for doing business as. And so we worked with a judge and a legal team to allow Change the Ref, our charity, to do business as James Madison Academy. And that was another huge step. Once we got that, it allowed James Madison Academy to start reaching out to these NRA members and inviting them to speak at a graduation. So another huge step was getting this guy, Russell Smith, on board. He's a prominent lawyer in New York, and he's most famous for being the only reason Sacha Baron Cohen and Borat has never been successfully sued. So we started to assemble a pretty awesome team who were all like 100% in on our cause. And it wasn't enough to just get Borat's lawyer. We then got Borat's whole undercover team, and they started to reach out on behalf of James Madison Academy. So they started to reach out as the CEO or as the president, and they started to reach out to the NRA members and say, hey, we would love to have you come speak at our graduation ceremony, which just so happens to be in Las Vegas this year. Right. So we started to reach out, and we landed. These are the two guys that took the bait. So the first one was David King, NRA president, and John Lott, who is an author of the one book that all pro-gun speakers use and they reference, and it's just full of all these really awful facts that aren't true. Right. So we got two prominent gun guys, and so we got them to say yes, and then we picked Las Vegas specifically because we thought it was a neutral grounds. We knew that it wasn't fully like a full-on conservative place. It wasn't fully liberal, and who doesn't love to go to Las Vegas to gamble? So we picked Las Vegas, and this is where we got a little lucky because it was the heart of COVID. It allowed us to arrange the chairs in a way that normally you'd be a little suspicious, right? And we purposely arranged the chairs to look like a cemetery, right? In the U.S., you have like Arlington Park Cemetery, where the tombstones are arranged in kind of a harrowing way. So we did that in Las Vegas. We set this all up, and we purposely placed them 6 feet by 6 feet, so people didn't question it. And we invited the speakers there, and the way that we got them to give these pro-gun speeches in front of all these victims was that we told them it was a rehearsal. So Friday night, we got them to come and do a full rehearsal, and we filmed the whole thing. Then when they were done later that night, we say, hey, sorry, this has been canceled due to security and COVID reasons. And they weren't really upset. They got to go and gamble. But that bought us enough time to start editing. We had to start editing around the clock. And we knew that the second these NRA speakers found out what they'd actually done, it would be a legal nightmare. They would send us a cease and desist, and we wouldn't be able to get this idea out into the world. So we were editing as fast as we possibly could. And that's where the final hurdle came in, and this is the hardest part of this project. And it was our internal law team, our lawyers, and this is not what they look like. This is a stock image of lawyers. But the final step was a night before we went live with this project, we finally had to show our legal team, and I bet you can imagine their reaction. It was just like in shock, and they of course said, there's no way we can put this out there. And so our plan of going live still remained the same, first crack of dawn in the morning. And so what we did was, while the legal team was reviewing, we sent them a link to the video, and we deactivated the link so they couldn't view it. And in that time, we just started sending it out to different news outlets. And the first one was the Associated Press in the United States. And the Associated Press is what everyone just sends their news stories to, and they'll take anything. But at 3 a.m., the Associated Press rejected our idea. They said it was too controversial. So at that point, we knew, oh God, we might have taken things too far. And so we were dead in the water. No one was picking up this story until BuzzFeed News, they took the risk. And once BuzzFeed News took the risk and they wrote about the lost class, it started to kind of pick up momentum. And other news outlets, they took that same risk, right? And we just feel so fortunate that I think the idea was powerful enough. And I think the motivation behind the idea that we shouldn't be afraid of the NRA, and that we shouldn't be afraid to fight dirty, right? And to, like, they've been using kind of like just really, really bad tactics all these years. Why can't we start to fight back? And so it started to get picked up by a lot of different sources, but success can be viewed a lot of different ways with this project. And in one of those, one of like the stories behind the scenes was the very next day, This is Congressman Swalwell, and he's on the House Judiciary Committee, the specific committee that handles gun violence in the United States. He shared the laws class the very next day in the House to all the other Congress members, and shared our video. Right. So if you view success, yes, it was press picking it up, but any kind of traction to get our message in front of those who can actually make a decision is a small win. Right. But success also comes in a lot of different forms. And this is Manuel and Patricia Oliver. And again, they were our partners every step of the way. They were the ones pushing us. And this image is them in the little motorhome on set. So this is literally 10 feet away from the speakers as they're speaking. And they stayed hidden in this motorhome. And so they were pushing us every step of the way, that it's just not enough to create an emotional film that's been done so many times, an emotional film that makes you feel a certain way. They said that's not enough anymore. It's not enough unless you place that same image or that same idea in front of those that are responsible, right? And so I just feel so fortunate to have worked, with Manuel and Patricia, and their whole model is creative confrontation, right? And so that was the true version of success for me, to see how they viewed this project. They view it as a start. They view it as like for the first time, we can start to chip away at the facade that the NRA has created, right? And if you view it in the same way as big tobacco in the US, right? The Truth Campaign picked a clear enemy, and they started to go at big tobacco over the years. It took many years, but they did step by step. And we view it the same way, chipping away at the NRA, decreasing their power so we can start to pass common sense gun laws. And so this just brings me back to one of the very first meetings when we presented the laws class to Manuel and Patricia. And this is a very special project for me. Like, I understand you don't always get to work on projects like this, but I'll never forget that first meeting, right? And we presented the work, and Manuel stopped everyone in their tracks, like hard stop on the meeting. And he said, "Hey, I want to let you know you are not put on this earth to make bank ads." He said, "You were put here right now for this very specific reason, to make this idea." And it's not every day that a client just stops you and says that to you. But it was pretty special. And I think for me, that started something inside me, and it was really scary. We didn't know how we were going to pull it off. But when you have someone pulling you every step of the way, saying, "No, we have to do this." Right. And so that was the loss class. And again, we see this as a stepping stone. This was just the very first project that we did with Change the Ref. It won't be the last. I think we're going to keep trying to find ideas that scare us, in the right way. And I think as long as we keep that true north of how do we create great ideas, but then place them in front of those that need to see them, right? Like, no longer just preaching to the choir, but actually going at the NRA. And so I'll leave you, and I'm excited for Q&A. Hopefully you've been putting some questions in that Q&A chat area, because there's a lot of elements that I might not have answered. But what I want to leave you with is what I think my creative process is. My mantra is just simply find an idea that scares you, right? And unless you have that feeling in your gut before you start of like, oh, I don't know if we could do this, or we might get in trouble doing this. And it doesn't have to be on something as serious as fighting gun reform in the United States. It could be the way that you approach any project, even a little red State Farm banner. Find something that scares you in a good way. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm like spying through the comments, and there's so many people that are basically just kind of awestruck by your presentation. I think people are kind of struggling to come up with questions because they've just been so inspired. So thank you so much for speaking so well on that. We've had a couple of questions already come through, and there's just another one just popped in as well. So yeah, as I mentioned, please do pop any questions you want to ask into the chat function so that we can ask them now. Now is your time to get your questions heard. But the first question we had, which was obviously you talked a lot about kind of trying to create risky projects, but do you have any words of advice for creatives who are trying to pull off really meaningful but potentially risky purpose-driven work, especially in advertising?
Yeah, yeah. I think first of all, find a cause that you're passionate about, right? I happen to be very passionate about gun violence in the U.S. It's a very specifically American problem, and I talked about that, and um, I think I think I wanted to join that fight just because I felt like it needed a fresh voice. It needed a little more of an aggressive take on what's been done. I personally had the opinion that the work that's been done up until this point uh, didn't have the right intention, or it was just being done just to keep shocking people instead of going at those who were responsible. So that was my personal take on that, and so I just felt like I had an opinion to give. I wanted to leave my mark on it. And so finding a cause that you are passionate about. I think also an important thing is to find people equally as passionate as you are, right? So the one name that I left out of this presentation was my partner in crime, which her name is Ashley Geishiker, and she's Leo Burnett's head of production. And so I had a production partner every step of the way that was equally as invested in making this idea come to life. And so, um, right, like I went through all the different people that wanted to join the same cause, and I guess that's my message is you can't do anything alone, right? Like you need to find something that really it kind of ignites you and keeps you alive, and then go find other people that have that same drive and sell them on that idea. Find the idea and then go one by one and say, hey, like, do you want to join? um, and again, that cause can be anything. I think like there's a lot of different opinions in advertising on the role of cause related work, and I couldn't think that it's more necessary. I really do. I think like yes, advertising should be fun. It should help businesses make money, and we should sell products. But at the same time, it's always like a yes and. I think at the same time, I do believe we can use creativity for good, right? And it's up to you what cause that you feel passionate about. Early on in my career, it was helping the world water crisis, and my old partner and I, Frank, we found a water charity, Water's Life, and that's what we were really passionate about, and we did that for a while, and this is kind of my next cause that I will keep working on at the same time as I work on other brands.
Amazing. Yeah. And actually, kind of just tagging on to that point, because you've obviously just mentioned that this is something you're like passionate to do, and finding the right things to get behind in order to kind of make these types of projects. So someone's mentioned, you obviously spoke a lot about confrontation within your presentation and using confrontation as a tool. So someone said they completely understand how that makes sense to this project, but wonder how you can judge how and when confrontation is actually the right move, or where it might not work for every project.
Mm. Oh man, that's a good question. God, I think like the idea in itself has to lead the way, right? Like landing on a great idea and then working backwards from what decisions have to be made to make that idea the best version of itself. And so is my own makeup, like I want to come into every idea and just do it in a way that's never been done before, but that's not always right? Like I think the best thing that you can do is not bring your own ego into any idea, right? So like depending on what's right for the brief, depending on what's right for the client, that dictates what you do. This one called for really harsh confrontation, right? Because guess what? Every step of the way, the clients were saying, nope, not enough, right? We showed them different ideas that were a little more in the lines of like uh, a cover of a song you might know, but made it sad over footage of classrooms. And they said, absolutely not. They said, that's more of the same. And they said, how are we going to go after those responsible? So from that perspective, the idea then had to be way more confrontational. Um, if you're working on a toilet paper brief or on a brief for a bank, it might not be as confrontational, but that doesn't mean there still can't be conflict in there. I think the good stuff is always pushing off of something, whether or not you call that the problem, right? Looking for better problems to push against. So I always think there should be a certain level of like tension, but I totally understand not every assignment can be approached like we did the lost class, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, putting tension into your work is always a really important aspect of working on any project. And it's, yeah, big, as you said, the conflict doesn't have to mean approaching a specific opinion head on. There's lots of ways you can kind of approach conflict within projects. A really good point there. And actually, just kind of one last kind of extra add on to that conflict question. Someone's asked, how much backlash did you actually get from the pro-gun side, and specifically the guest speakers you tricked?
That's the question we keep getting. And I think before we launched this idea, we were expecting to get a ton. Like my own family they were like texting me and calling me daily, being like, "Man, this is not a good idea," right? And so that gave us a sense of just like the kind of the hold that the NRA has in the U.S. They are that kind of group where like it's like kind of like the boogeyman. It's just like, oh, you don't want to mess with them, and we had a different point of view. It's like, no, why hasn't someone messed with them? That being said, there wasn't any backlash, and to me, that's because you can't argue with this idea. You can't argue with it for a lot of reasons. Number one, displaying that stat, 3,044 dead students in that way, you can't argue with that. That's a fact. And then the other thing is what we were asking for at the end. That was very important to us. Is like if we believe all these other, gun related ads, you leave it being like, okay, but now what, right? Like, do you want me to just think guns are bad? Okay, I already know that, but like, what can people do? And the more and more we keep having shootings, I feel like people are just left with that feeling. What can we do? So it's very important for us to leave and focus on one thing, which was sign a petition for universal background checks. And universal background checks are funny enough, are something that even the NRA agrees with. As an organization, they started for gun safety. So like we wanted to pick something that wasn't polarizing. It's like, no, everyone can agree there should be a universal background check if you want to buy a gun. And so I think leaving it so neutral, they didn't argue with that at all. And the last thing was, the fact that these speakers didn't do a basic background check about James Madison Academy, about what they were going to speak at. It just showed, I don't know, just a very satirical approach to how ridiculous that rule is. And I think like the far right news covering it, Fox News covered this, and it was a very neutral point of view. We really didn't get a ton of backlash.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, I feel like people just expect that you're going to get loads and loads of backlash, and especially the fact that people feel like you tricked someone. But that's I think that's a really important point there, actually. Just thinking of making sure you've really thought through the idea to its full capacity, and actually, what could you argue against with that? You're not making false statements. You're not saying anything that isn't true. So how could you argue against that fact? That's a really interesting point. So obviously this is a really emotional piece of work that you've created, and is really trying to make an impact and kind of make change in the world. Someone's asked, do you think in order to do that kind of project, do you have to create or choose a villain to make that work and have an impact? Or do you think there's lots of other ways you can make that possible?
Man, Great questions. And this is just personally, like, I think the best thing that I could have done and my team could have done was approach this subject uh, almost from like a holistic point of view, right? And just listen to our clients and hear what they wanted to do, right? So in their point of view, we have to create a clear villain because otherwise to go at a problem as big as gun violence, it seems daunting. Where do you even start? Right? So their point of view was so crystal clear on like the clear villain was the NRA. And I think approaching the subject, that's the feeling that I got all these years is like, why aren't things changing? And people just keep asking that. Why aren't things changing? It's like, well, it's because of the politicians. They're not passing the laws. Okay. Like, how do we vote in better politicians? Get out and vote. Okay, that's one way. And I just think like working with our strategy team to go to the very core of like, okay, like if we had to pick one lane and hit it as hard as we could, who is that clear enemy? And it always led us back to the NRA. And so I think it's interesting, especially in anti-gun violence space, all the different causes are doing different type of work, right? You have March for Our Lives, you have Sandy Hook Promise, and so uh, it's not saying that any of their work is wrong. It's just different, right? And I think the one message that I have is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're doing something, right? And if I had it my way, every single agency, it would be a requirement to figure out what are you doing this year for gun violence, and you should do multiple ones a year. And that was our client's point of view is the repetition of ideas out in the world, like the awareness. It should be the most urgent thing at all times. And so I think that's another form of success for the lost class is really the only time America talks about gun violence is when there's a shooting, right? And that's really sad. And so like for the US to be talking about gun violence without there being a tragedy, for us that was a big kind of milestone of like, okay, we should be able to get this subject in the news in mass media without there being a tragedy, and we need to keep that up until things change.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I think, yeah, a lot of these projects often tend to be quite reactive to events that have happened. But actually, yeah, keeping up that conversation is such an important point to make, and it shouldn't just be straight after something's happened. It should be a continued conversation. So you touched there on the fact that obviously there's a lot of other people who are making projects similar to this. So obviously it's a huge thing that people are thinking about at the moment. It's a huge thing that a lot of people are trying to get their eyes on, of talking about guns in America. So how did you, that first shot you showed us at the start of that idea that you had on that notebook, how did you come up with that? Just that idea, that was just that little idea in your notebook.
Yeah, and that was like it was like 6 months in the works, right? So we from the time that we started the conversation with Change the Ref to working with our strategy team to landing on that idea was about 6 months. And the reason it took that long is because we spent a lot of time just figuring out like what is the problem. And there's so many different routes you can go of this of like who's the audience, which specific problem do we pick? Do we pick universal background checks? Do we pick ban on assault weapons? Do we pick hollow point or bump stock, or like so many different things, red flag laws? And so we have such a good strategy team at Leo that like we didn't stop. Like even when we thought like, okay, I think that's a good strategy, we kept diving deeper and deeper. And part of that research project was admittedly looking at other work in the anti-gun violence space. And we were very critical of like, okay, the famous pieces that like have been, that garnered all this attention, in our point of view, where were they falling short? Or like if you take that as a stepping stone, where can we take what they've done and then elevate it even more? How do we change the game? And that's why such a specific point of view of going at the NRA was the ultimate brief. And so then once we landed on that, it seemed scary enough, like easier said than done. But then having teams really just start to go week by week on ideas, and I think this is the hardest that we've pushed teams. And at least in my career, we had a lot of rounds where we thought we had the idea, and at the end of the day, like it wasn't scary enough, right? We just felt like it would be too similar to what's been done, and so I'll never forget the one day one of the junior teams just had that little image of Arlington National Cemetery, and they just said, okay, this, but imagine graduation chairs, and then they had kind of a little write up, and the write up was it was kind of like oh, and wouldn't it be nice if we also figured out a way to get an NRA guy to speak at that graduation? And I remember seeing that little add on and just laughing. We all kind of laughed, like, oh, yeah, like pie in the sky in a perfect world, that would be crazy. And so it was like always in the back of our heads until we had the idea of the rehearsal. The rehearsal was like, oh, that's actually how you could get them to speak without knowing. Um, so yeah, it was crazy. Like by all means, there's no reason that idea should have made it off the page, but we had enough people uh, who were crazy enough, and I think that's the missing piece. Is like I don't think this is a truly repeatable process. We had a lot of people who were willing, no matter what, to make this happen. And when I mean no matter what, like willing despite our jobs, everything, to get this out in the world because that's what mattered. And so I don't know if every agency is up for that challenge. I feel really lucky to work at an agency that was willing to take that risk and supported me. Um, and again, I just feel lucky.
No, that actually ties into a question a few people have kind of touched on here as well. And I think what you said, that it's not necessarily a repeatable experience for every agency, for every client. But if you're coming up with ideas for clients, how can you convince them? If you're coming up with a really, really big idea, how can you convince them not to be scared to kind of go with your massive, potentially like category changing idea that's going to really fight the mold?
Oh, in my opinion, sometimes, and that's why like part of my mantra is like a maker mentality, right? So sometimes instead of getting like the full green light and every step of the way getting them to say yes and yes and yes, sometimes if an idea is crazy enough and big enough, you might just have to go figure out how to make it and then show them, hey, like this is what I was thinking all along. What do you think? Because everyone views ideas differently in their head, right? Like how it is in your head might be totally different from someone who doesn't think that way. So sometimes you might just have to get your hands dirty and go make it and go figure it out. And going back to my creative process, I was lucky to work for a guy, Menno, who day one had that maker mentality, right? And he like it didn't matter how many no's we got from people, we would just book our own tickets, and I would figure out how to work sound equipment, and Frank would shoot it, and we would just go make it. We would go make it, we'd do it, and then we'd prove to people, no, like it is good and it's not that scary. So the second you have something to react to, it becomes way less of a hurdle. Again, that doesn't work all the time, but sometimes ideas are so insurmountable and crazy that you have to just do it. And Lost Class was kind of that way. The amount that we had to keep secret behind the scenes and just keep moving forward and know that in our minds, okay, this is worth it. I'm happy it paid off. It very easily could not have.
Yeah, and I guess again, this is tying to another question someone's asked, which you might not be able to answer, to be fair. But obviously, that can just take a lot. Ideas can just take a lot of you just persevering with them and just to make them happen. But you mentioned that there's ideas you've had in the past that haven't necessarily been able to come through to fruition. Are there any ideas that you can talk about that you wish could have got pushed through but just never got to happen?
Oh man, I mean, there's a million, and every creative has their own like graveyard of great ideas. Um, And that's the maddening and beautiful thing about advertising is you just never know. You never know, and I think it's the ability, and I forgot who said this quote, but it's the ability to move on, uh, go from setback to setback, and not lose any of your enthusiasm, right? So like you're going to get punched in the mouth, you're going to lose, and how do you just keep the same energy and optimism and enthusiasm? And I think that's the name of the game is like never getting too down because yes, this one we were able to get it made, but there's a million of other ones. I don't have any that are too specific. But I just know I have a whole notebook full of ones that like they make me really sad if I were to look in there, be like, oh man, that one's so great. But the other great thing is you never know when you're going to be able to bring like an element of an old idea back, right? I always have my ears up, like, ooh, that would be the perfect time to bring that one back from the dead. Um, so I just think that like it's a marathon, and personally, how you keep yourself like keep a short memory, right? Just because you lose that one doesn't mean there isn't another one right around the corner. So how do you almost be a sucker? Just like every opportunity, treat it new and come into it fresh.
And that's such a good piece of advice for people, especially people who are like first starting out in industry, because obviously it takes a long time to get through to these massive projects that you're working on. So just because your idea didn't necessarily get picked up the first time, just keep it in your back pocket. You never know when something in there could come up again. And actually, that kind of ties into quite a few people have been asking some more kind of general questions about just career advice. So whilst we have you, we might as well try and ask you for a little bit more like wider career advice for the working industry. The first one actually is tying very much to your own personal experience. So, how did you go from those banner ad briefs, which you spoke about at the start, to the working on this massive project that you've just worked on now?
Uh, because I hated it. I hated it so much, and it made me so mad. And I had a partner who felt the same way. Frank and I, we were just miserable, and I just think it's a decision you make in your life. You either stay miserable or you say, okay, enough of this. We got to figure out a way to get out of this. And I keep talking about luck, but the luck in that moment was at the same time as we're working on those banner ads, on the other side of the agency there was a guy that we knew was doing all this amazing work, and that was Menno. And so we at night we would stay late and be like, okay, how can we get an idea in front of Menno and stop working on these banners and start working with him, right? And so we just started thinking of random ideas, and a lot of those were like hot sauce ideas, and some, I think we had one idea that was like for a water charity, and we happened to show that to the big boss. He had us go talk to Menno, and the rest was history. Menno said, okay, let's fly to Haiti. Uh, like, we'll pay for our own tickets. Let's fly to Haiti and we'll shoot it. And that was just uh, unbelievable, right? But it took us identifying, okay, this is what we don't want to do. And then what do we want to do? Okay, what's it gonna take to do that? It took staying late. It took a lot of extra work. It took risk, but it's totally worth it, right? You don't want to do something that you don't want to do. So like I think just setting that intention and being very honest about where you are, and sometimes doing things differently to get something you don't have, right? So I know that might sound like pretty basic, but again, I just like I couldn't be thankful enough for a partner that felt the same way. It's like, okay, we can't keep doing these banners.
Yeah, no, I think sometimes you've just got to put yourself out there and just see kind of where it can take you. And so I think we've got time for two more questions. So I'll make these quite quick. But uh, do you have any particular attributes you would love to see in kind of the next generation of creative talent that's coming through? What would you love to see in junior creatives if they were passing through your agency?
Oh man, uh, I would love to see toughness, uh, and and I really do. Like I know I think I'm really fair, and But at the same time, I think our industry is missing a little bit of like the toughness of like nothing's personal, but like just hard work, like just plain hard work and not giving up. Um, and that's how I was kind of brought up is having bosses just be really tough on me, right? And, out of love and out of respect, but it's only because they had the best interest in mind. They wanted to get to the best idea possible. So like I know that the one thing that you can't teach is hard work and hustle and passion. So that's really all I look for in young creatives is just the attitude. It's purely attitude. When I first started off, I wasn't good. I really wasn't. I wasn't talented. So I had to make up for that by just outworking people. And so it's unbelievable to me like how far attitude can go. Not giving up, being polite, keeping your head down, and just outworking people. Because when you're young, the name of the game is quantity. If you just show up with enough ideas, one of those, hopefully your boss will be like, "Ooh, okay, we're in business. That's the idea." So name of the game is numbers and just flat out working hard and being tough and not giving up.
Brilliant. And then one last question, which kind of ties into a lot of what you've just said, and hopefully will be a nice kind of end point to make to. Well, obviously, we've got a lot of junior creatives here on watching this session. How can you tackle the feeling that you're not ready yet?
That's the best feeling. Don't ever lose that because guess what? I still feel like that all the time. I'm not kidding you. Don't ever like that you have to use how to use that feeling to your advantage, right? Constantly question, work harder, look at D&AD annuals, look at the work that has been good, teach yourself. Just like you can never stop feeling that way, right? Because you got to keep pushing. And the second you feel like you are ready, you're in trouble, right? Because we can always learn more. We can always scare ourselves in the right way. So my response to that is like, you should be feeling that way, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Amazing. That is a brilliant way to end today's talk. That's all the time we have for questions. A huge thank you to Sam for all of your amazing words of wisdom in that Q&A, and also just for your fantastic presentation. As I mentioned, everyone has been fawning over it in the chat, so thank you so much today, and thank you audience for all your incredible questions. We didn't get quite around to all of them, but hopefully we managed to answer as many as possible and give you some amazing advice. So just a quick reminder, there's still lots more of the festival to explore. If you haven't already, please do make sure you have a look on the page to see the talks that are coming up. So tomorrow we've got our final talk of the week, which is Ask the Industry Anything. So it's going to be a very exciting session. And also we have our New Blood ceremony, which is streaming straight after it, 2 p.m. BST. So that's where you'll get to see the level of pencil that all of this year's New Blood Awards winners have won. And just a quick reminder, you can stay up to date with all things New Blood and festival related and continue the conversation by following us on Twitter, which is at D&AD Newblood, or on Instagram, which is at newblood_D&AD. That's everything from us for today, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.